Donald Trump showed up to a football game in South Carolina over the weekend where he didn't quite get the warm welcome he was hoping for. We're going to start this segment with just a couple of funny clips of Trump being booed at the Clemson versus South Carolina game over the weekend. And it's always great to see him, especially in red states, getting this sort of negative reception. And then we'll get into a lot of other important things. But first, a little bit of context. So Trump showed up to this big game, the Palmetto Bowl between Clemson and South Carolina. And Clemson is the alma mater of Nikki Haley. So it was sort of a way to try to win over supporters on Haley's home turf for Trump, and increasingly it's seeming like Nikki Haley is going to be Trump's main Republican rival, so the timing makes sense as DeSantis drops like a rock. Is that what Trump says about his polls? So that being said, here was first Trump pulling up to the stadium, and then we'll get to him on the field when it gets much worse. And I'll show you in just a moment Trump going out on the field and it getting much more brutal. But first, I have to address something, a scandal of sorts, okay? The first Luke Beasley show's scandal I'm caught up in. Not really, but I do want to address it because it's been bothering me. So I was having a wonderful Thanksgiving, took a couple days off, was with family, it was wonderful. And all of a sudden I have men coming up to me, big, strong men, tears gushing down their face, pouring onto the floor, saying, Luke, people are upset about something in your comments. Okay, well, let's go find out what it is. And hundreds of people, probably dozens, but maybe hundreds, were pointing out something about 3 videos that I had released. And some people were genuinely upset with me because of it. What am I referring to? Well, I'll put a screenshot up on screen. And the outfit I was wearing with this shirt did, I'll admit, appear like there was no shirt under my blazer. I only realized that after people started commenting about it. But for a second, I was like, I'm seeing all these comments about, why are you shirtless? Oh my gosh, you're shirtless. And I was like, I dress myself and I know I didn't go on the show with just a blazer. So what's going on here? Well, it was sort of an optical illusion. If you zoom in, you can see, obviously I was. Now, why am I addressing this? What the heck's going on, Luke? You might ask. I kept seeing these comments and then was thinking over the weekend, because it started on Thursday, imagine being you. Can you imagine being you? Imagine being yourself and watching the show. You like the show. And then you genuinely think I come out bare chest and just for no reason. I'm just blazer, just a style choice. That could genuinely make people think, oh, this is sort of unprofessional, right? So then I was worried, are there thousands of people out there genuinely thinking I came on the show with no shirt on? Or are most of them zooming in and seeing that there was a skin tone shirt? Hopefully most of y'all don't think the former, whichever order I did that in, and indeed know that I would not do that. That would be a strange style choice. Because I saw somebody say something like, someone on your production staff needs to lose their job over this. And someone else who said, be better than that, Luke. So hopefully it's resolved. With that being said, here's another clip of Trump. And this time it's him out on the field getting booed very badly. And of course, I always want to be transparent, clear with all of you. There were lots of supporters too in the stands. And apparently there were chants of, we want Trump at some point. But in a South Carolina stadium, you would think the reception would be all positive, essentially. And you just know, because of how petty and sensitive Trump is, hearing boos really gets under his skin, especially when it seemed to be the predominant noise, at least from my perspective listening to those clips. And quickly, as a reminder, somewhat recently he got a similar response in Iowa. Okay, so it's great to see him being booed. Why not? Make our day better. But one of my goals is to always bring these conversations back to why it's so important that he loses in 2024. Even though I do think it's healthy for us to often be lighthearted, as I am so often as we discuss politics so that we don't stress ourselves to death. It's also important to acknowledge that it's not just fun and games. And to that effect, in the last few weeks, a piece was released from The Atlantic that seeks to put into perspective the increasingly out in the open, dangerous intentions of Trump if he were to get a second term. And I've been closely following and discussing, covering for you all the media's coverage of Trump and of the 2024 election, because I think there are a lot of problems with that. I think this election is being treated far too normally by too many people. And there isn't the sense of urgency and alarm that there really should be. And so when I see publications like The Atlantic doing reporting like this, it does make me happy. And after I break down this article, we'll get to Trump's response to it because it made him unhappy. The article's titled, "Have you listened lately to what Trump is saying? He's becoming frighteningly clear about what he wants." And the article goes on to discuss recent quotes from Trump, him saying, quote, "We pledge to you that we will root out the communist, Marxist, fascist, and the radical left thugs that live like vermin within the confines of our country, that lie and steal and cheat on elections." Or him saying that migrants poison the blood of America. Both examples of wording that is nearly directly that of Hitler. And the vermin comment also was pointed out in the article to be a dehumanizing term used in the lead up to the Rwandan genocide. And as I've said before, making these connections is not just people on the left trying to be hyperbolic because Trump's bad. It's pointing out there's a long history that we have to look at as a reference, as a guide, and as a reminder that we should be intolerant of this sort of dehumanizing rhetoric. It has to be called out immediately. And not enough people are doing that when it comes to Trump. The article continues, Trump's rhetoric is a permission slip for his supporters to dehumanize others just as he does. He portrays others as existential threats, determined to destroy everything MAGA world loves about America. Trump is doing two things at once: push the narrative that his enemies must be defeated while dissolving the natural inhibitions most human beings have against hating and harming others. It signals to his supporters that any means to vanquish the other side is legitimate. The normal constraints that govern human interactions no longer apply. The article then goes on to walk through some of the other recent chilling statements from Trump, many of which, probably all of them, we've covered in the past, and I'll summarize those in just a second. But the reason The Atlantic here and many others, including myself, are trying to scream out to people, just listen to what Trump is saying, is because it seems like, I guess, just observing his actions hasn't been enough for people. For example, I truly do not understand how a single American could have watched Trump attempt to prevent the peaceful transfer of power, which is imperative for the functioning of our democracy, and then still consider voting for him in 2024, as a lot of people are currently doing. If people would just go read reporting and the indictments that outline how he got people to sign forms saying they were the duly elected and lawful electors of certain swing states that he lost when they were not that, and then tried to pass those off as the actual electors to justify him staying in power, or him trying to get his vice president to just unconstitutionally refuse to certify the election results, or whatever it might be. To me, just reading about his actions should lead every American to go, if we want our democracy to survive, we have to vote against this guy. But clearly that's not working. So if some reason you believe, oh, the liberal media, they're misconstruing the facts of Donnie's little coup attempt, then listen to his words that are increasingly becoming even more clearly authoritarian and extremely dangerous, as I'll go through. Now, before going through what The Atlantic did, I always like to just add on to these sorts of stories anytime I can. Trump called for the termination of the Constitution. We just kind of forgot about that. We didn't, but lots of people did. On Truth Social, he wrote, "A massive fraud of this type of magnitude," referring to his lies about the election, "allows for the termination of all rules, regulations, and articles, even those found in the Constitution. Termination of all rules, regulations, and articles. Okay, let's just get clear that that's something he said. You shouldn't be willing to vote for somebody and you're voting them into an office where they'll swear an oath to a constitution that they called for the termination of. So I'll just put that up front. Then The Atlantic writes, Trump's opponents, including the press, are truly the enemy of the people. That's a quote from him. Of course, he demanded that the parent company of MSNBC and NBC be investigated for treason over what he described as one-sided and vicious coverage. That term treason, all of his followers they hear that, they say the punishment for treason, death. He insinuated on his social network, True Social, that the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, deserved to be executed for committing treason. At a Trump event in Iowa days after that post, one Trump supporter asked, and here's the point that I previously made, why Milley wasn't in there before a firing squad within a month. Another told NBC News, treason is treason. There's only one cure for treason, being put to death. Then outlines some of his numerous attacks against prosecutors and judges, family of prosecutors. All of those we've covered extensively. It talks about how Trump has openly mocked the fact that a deranged right-winger crushed in the skull of Nancy Pelosi's husband, Paul Pelosi, because any enemy of Trump deserves any level of violence, according to him, it seems. It talks about how he's celebrated those who attempted to overthrow the government in service of him to prevent the peaceful transfer of power. Then references this analysis from NYU historian Ruth Ben-Ghiat.
Since the fascists, authoritarians always want to do two things. They want to change the way that people see violence, making it into something necessary and patriotic and even morally righteous. And they want to change the way people see their targets. And so they use dehumanizing language. And former President Trump is doing both. He's been using his rallies since 2015 to, shift the idea of violence into something positive. And now he's starting to use dehumanizing rhetoric, all these groups who live like vermin. And this is what the original fascists did. Hitler started talking about Jews as, parasites in 1920. So by the time he got in 1933, Germans had been exposed to this dehumanizing rhetoric for 13 years.
I mean, you have all of these widely respected historians and experts saying this stuff is really dangerous. And yes, Trump's followers, they'll just think it's fake news or they don't care. But I guess I'm not being made the most disappointed by them because I expect that to be the reaction. What really makes me disheartened is seeing all of the moderate Republicans and centrists who watched Trump try to prevent the peaceful transfer of power, read his posts calling for the termination of the Constitution, are hearing his increasingly dangerous rhetoric, and are just not alarmed, or at least aren't alarmed enough. Or they'll say things like, yeah, but that's just Trump being Trump. It's not. This is super dangerous. Trump is out campaigning openly on locking up his political opponents if he gets into the White House again. He's reportedly putting together detailed plans to lock up critics, invoke the Insurrection Act to crush demonstrations against him right when he gets into office. Extensive plans are being put together to consolidate executive authority and have Trump take more direct control over the DOJ for the purposes I previously mentioned. Gut the bureaucracy, install exclusively loyalists into those positions so that they can enact his every ambition. And yet still, I'm somehow seeing coverage of this election like Trump is sort of a normal candidate. Or that the important conversations, Biden's age, oh my gosh, his age. We gotta be real. It's why I've been talking about this so much. And we have to realize that so much is on the line in 2024. And hopefully enough people realize that come time to vote. By the way, here's more of Ruth Ben-Ghiat's analysis as it pertains to Trump's election denying.
He also called himself in those remarks a very proud election denier. It's been 3 years since he lost that 2020 contest, and we know he's still not conceded. And we know also where the majority of Republicans and Republican-leaning voters stand in recent polls as recently as August. 69% of Republicans and Republican leaners say that Mr. Biden's win was not legitimate. So, Ruth, what's the resonance of that lie? And also the fact that Mr. Trump is embracing that now, saying he's very proud to be an election denier.
This is part of being much more overt about becoming an authoritarian and transforming America into some version of autocracy, because the end game of election denial is actually to convince Americans that elections shouldn't be the way they choose their leaders. They're too unreliable. And we're beginning to see this with his allies. Michael Flynn said we shouldn't, elections, we might not even have one. Tommy Tuberville, the senator, said, let's not even have elections. Or the talk about America is never, pure democracy doesn't work. All of this is part of a campaign of, you could call it mass re-education of Americans to want forms of authoritarian rule that Trump will give.
Yeah, it seems to be the most obvious thing in the world. When you start saying that the only way elections can be fair is if my side wins, and you get you saw that stat, right? Nearly 70% of your party to believe that. You're setting up a situation that's incompatible with a healthy democracy, and you're undermining the belief in our election systems in such a way that, as was pointed out, would lead your followers to think elections aren't really the best way to select leaders. To this day, most of the Republican Party thinks, despite the election results, Trump should have stayed president. He should have been able to get Brad Raffensperger to fraudulently find votes, 11,780. Or Mike Pence to count fraudulent electoral votes, or any of these crazy schemes. They wish that had worked. That would have just been the tossing out of the rule of law when it comes to our elections. But that's what they want. I told you I'd show you Trump's response to the Atlantic piece, so here is that. It's so good to see how badly the third-rate magazine, The Atlantic, is doing. It's failing at a level seldom seen before, even in the publishing business. False and fake stories do it every time. They've got a rich person funding the ridiculous losses, but at some point, rich people get smart also. Steve Jobs would not be proud of his wife, Lorene, and the way she's spending the money. The radical left is destroying America. So kind of the typical Trump response anytime someone reports something that he doesn't like. Before you go, don't forget to become a member at lukebeasleyshow.com/membership. We're going to be hemorrhaging support after the big scandal that was Shirtgate. No, become a member if you want to. No pressure, but it'd be great. lukebeasleyshow.com/membership. Plus follow me on Threads at lukebeasleyofficial, Instagram at lukebeasleyofficial, X at lukebeasley, and sign up for the Beasley Brief. Just picture this, okay? You wake up in the morning, bring. Hopefully you don't have your notifications on. I don't want to wake you up in the morning, but an email gets sent to you. Oh my goodness, here is a little breakdown, a little summary of what happened the day before. And you got links, you want to do a little reading so that you jump into your day properly informed through the lens of the Luke Beasley Show. With all that being said, I'll talk to you all. lukebeasleyshow.com/brief is where you can find that, and I'll talk to you all tomorrow.